Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. And the Russian Federation has ended the Black Sea Agreement, so that means that shipments of foods, cereals, grains from the Ukraine ports along the Black Sea are no longer safe just to simply sail, that they are subjected to being stopped, possibly attacked by the Russian Federation, which means that, well, one, that food prices for certain goods can go up. But more importantly, what it does mean is that for those countries that really need the food stuff because people are in a state of famine or drought, and they are also facing starvation in those the same areas that are waiting for this food stuff to come so that they can have relief until, well, nature takes its course, are now in dire trouble. And the question is, what is going to happen? How is this going to get fixed? And in the next couple segments, we're going to hear a little bit about that, but I have some other questions around that when we come back.
Good morning, all. So we are in the middle of the United Nations General Assembly session, considering item of the agenda, territorial temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And today, of course, we could not ignore the yesterday's decision by the Russian Federation to withdraw from the Black Sea Grain Initiative. But this particular, and we discussed it in detail yesterday at the UN Security Council meeting. We touched upon it today, and I took the opportunity to call on all countries present in the room to urge Russia to return to the Black Sea Grain Initiative and ensure the sustainable delivery of Ukrainian cereals to global markets. But the main focus of my address to the Assembly today was the devastating situation for civilians as resulting from the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I brought with me a diary of a Ukrainian teenager, Arina Perunina, who lost her father. And basically I said to colleagues, listen, usually here from this stage, we make voices of governments heard all over the world. And today, I wanted voices of Ukrainian children to be heard all over the world. Children who went through enormous suffering, who lost their beloved ones. And unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is not the only armed conflict raging in the world. So I'm pretty certain that kids in Africa, in the Middle East, and other areas affected by various armed conflicts, they go through the same suffering and through the same pain. And by allowing the voices of Ukrainian children to be heard in the United Nations, we also allow all children from all over the world who suffer from war to be heard in this room. I believe another issue. So I urge the United Nations to join efforts in returning thousands of Ukrainian children who were forcibly deported or abducted by Russia. And unfortunately, we are talking about thousands. I also highlighted the problem, the scale of the problem of civilian disappearances. So basically, Russia is also taking civilians into custody, and there are thousands of them. You cannot exchange them as prisoners of wars, and we believe international community lacks instruments to address this issue of civilians kidnapped by the Russian Federation. So we initiated the development of such an instrument, and we will be working with countries on this. And finally, I touched upon, I addressed the arguments being made by some countries who believe that sending weapons to Ukraine is wrong, that talks should begin immediately, and concessions should be made, and so forth and so on. So I took the opportunity to translate their beautiful diplomatic phrases into the language of common sense. Because basically, when you say that countries should stop sending weapons to Ukraine because it fuels war, in real life, these people say we want Ukraine to lose as soon as possible, and the war, because they will be defenseless, and the war to end, and we will mourn Ukrainians from one year to another, saying never again, while doing business with Russia as usual. So politics is politics, and statements are statements, but sometimes it makes sense to translate political statements into real language and to explain what these politicians mean when they say that. I will be working hard until the day comes when there will be no such issue on the agenda of such item on the UN General Assembly agenda as temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. If we make a compromise, if we allow Russia to keep at least 1 square kilometer of our land under control, it means that this item will remain on the agenda. And this is not the goal, this should not be the goal of our common effort. Thank you.
Foreign Minister, President Zelenskyy floated the idea of the Black Sea Grain Initiative continuing, but with just Ukraine, Turkey and the UN. Could you explain to us how that might work? And a second question, if you can, your efforts to get the crime of aggression and a tribunal set up, that seems to have stalled. What is the latest on that?
Well, the offer is very simple. If there is political will to ensure supply of Ukrainian cereals to global markets, there must be a way to do that. And if Russia withdrew from the initiative, then Ukraine, Turkey and the United Nations or any other country or countries of the world could come up with their initiative, either to continue within the existing framework or to create a new model of deliveries. The problem, of course, is what is going to happen if Russia decides to attack a vessel carrying grain. But this is the issue that is being considered now in different capitals and here in the headquarters. But what is clear is that things cannot remain as they are. We cannot just say, okay, Black Sea Grain Initiative is dead, Russia killed it, and now we have to sit and see how it evolves. We have to find an alternative. And there are very active discussions now, and including in my many bilateral meetings I'm holding here on how to find the way out. But the key message is the way out requires political will. This is not an easy situation. We have to take risks. and we have to demonstrate that we can carry on without Russia. Political will is also very relevant to the issue of the tribunal. We are still discussing the matter with those countries who believe that the best way forward is the internationalized tribunal, not an international one. The core problem that we are open to various options, but the core problem we need to address, and there is still no answer to that, is how to make first Troika, President, Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, accountable for the crimes they were involved in. And not every model of the tribunal has an answer to that question. So discussions continue.
Mr. Minister, what indication do you have that the Russians would even be open to further discussions of this, considering everything they've said about not having their needs met in terms of the Black Sea Grain Initiative?
Not having what?
What I'm saying is, what indications do you believe that you're hearing from the Russian side that they'd even be open to discussing the grain deal restarting based on what they've said before about their needs not being met in terms of the access to the SWIFT system and sending their grain and their fertilizers to market?
Yeah, it's an excellent line to take. I invade a country, I block ports of this country, I put the world at the risk of global food crisis, and then I say that I'm ready to lift some of the restrictions if I get away with some of the crimes I have committed. I mean, if you accept this, if we are to accept this logic, then the list of demands coming from Russia will be growing. You accommodate one of their demands, they extend the initiative by 1 month, and 1 month after they will come up with another list of demands. This is called blackmail, and blackmail should not be tolerated. So instead of playing this game, Russia should simply play in good faith and implement in good faith Black Sea Grain Initiative.
Is there a red line here?
Which red line?
Is there a red line that you won't cross in terms of negotiation or giving up territory?
We are not negotiating with Russia, and even the grain deal was initiated between UN, Turkey and Ukraine on one side, and UN, Turkey and Russia on the other side.
Foreign Minister, if you don't mind, I would ask in Ukrainian for our domestic audience. Пане міністре, ми вчора чули від представників Росії, що Україна зробила зернову угоду комерційною для себе. Сьогодні Росія вже заявляє, що вони нібито готові безкоштовно постачати зерно в країни, що цього потребують. За результатами 2 днів переговорів, чи є у вас розуміння, це завершення угоди чи шантаж і торг, і за що торгується Росія насправді? Що говорить ваше дипломатичне чуття?
Росія завжди торгується за 2 речі. Гроші і території. Вони дуже жадібні люди, звикли все міряти в мільярдах, сидять там собі в Кремлі і рахують, кому який мільярд перепаде. Зараз в умовах суттєвих фінансових втрат Росії боротьба за кожну копійку загострюється. Тому, знаєте, був такий український політик, який називав інших політиків бариги. Да, так от в Кремлі сидять бариги і рубляться за кожну копійку. Тому, безумовно, одна з цілей, яку переслідує вихід Росії з Чорноморської зернової ініціативи, це спровокувати підвищення цін на зерно і під ці високі ціни продати якомога більшу кількість свого російського зерна, в тому числі змішуючи вкрадене українське зерно з російським, і заробити на цьому грошей для фінансування своєї воєнної машини, ну і собі в кишеню там на яхту щось відкласти. Це 100%, тому що ми бачимо, поки вони блокують Чорноморський коридор, російські кораблі з зерном шурують на повній потужності з Росії через Чорне море на інші ринки. Нам відомо про намагання Російської Федерації створити альтернативну домовленість про гуманітарне постачання зерна, для того, щоб показати, що можна це робити без України. Ми знаємо зміст цієї ініціативи, ми знаємо, яким країнам вони запропонували цю ініціативу реалізувати. Ми передали цим країнам інформацію, що ми знаємо. І якщо така ініціатива буде реалізована, то просто доволі порядні країни увійдуть в шахрайську схему з Росією. Тому ми працюємо над тим, щоб цього не сталося, щоб люди, тому що жодні гроші не варті зіпсованої репутації від співробітництва з Росією в цій сфері.
Minister Kuleba, on the grain, do you have you spoken with your European partners in terms of some short-term, immediate way to get grain out, to expand what you've been doing already with the Europeans over land and by river and rail, to kind of plug that hole until you can try and get something that's safe and practicable again going on the Black Sea?
The European Union was very helpful in setting up solidarity lanes, which allowed export of Ukrainian grain by land and by rivers, bypassing the Black Sea ports of Ukraine blocked by Russia. And we have advanced significantly in developing these solidarity lanes. I'm certain that following Russia's withdrawal from the grain initiative, these solidarity lanes will further be developed. The problem, though, is that even if we develop solidarity lanes to the fullest extent and put them all together, they will not be ready to compensate the absence of deliveries from Ukrainian ports on the Black Sea. So there is a way out, but it's not, this way out does not give you 100% compensation for the loss of the ports. And this is why it remains so essential in terms of ensuring global food security to get ports open again.
Thank you. Just following up on what you were saying about the ongoing discussions and the need to protect ships against the possibility of attack if that were to happen, are these discussions at all about some sort of international deployment or force to protect ships of Ukrainian grain in the Black Sea?
These discussions are literally about every possible option. Yesterday, when I had a meeting with the Secretary General ahead of his phone conversation with President Zelenskyy, we literally discussed all possible options with him, and he instructed relevant departments of the Secretariat to consider possible viable options. So less than 48 hours since Russia withdrew from the grain initiative, we are literally still looking into every possible option. We're doing it in Kyiv, our partners are doing it in Brussels, in Washington, here at the headquarters, in Ankara. Everyone is looking for the way out, and every option is on the table now. Okay, thank you guys. Have a good day. Stay safe.
And in his message for the day, the Secretary General reminds us that Nelson Mandela was a leader of immense achievement and extraordinary humanity. And as we commemorate his life and legacy, the Secretary General calls on all of us to take action to build a better world. Good way to start the briefing. Excuse me, hold on 2 seconds. Okay, this morning the Secretary General spoke to Security Council members at the debate on artificial intelligence. He said he was both shocked and impressed by the generative AI, adding they will clearly have an impact on everyday area of our lives, including the 3 pillars of the work of the United Nations. The Secretary General urged Council members to approach this technology with a sense of urgency, a global lens, and a learner's mindset, because what we have seen is just the beginning. The Secretary General also underscored that Generative AI has enormous potential for good and evil at scale, and that without action to address the risks it poses, we are derelict in our responsibilities to present for the present and future generations. He welcomed the call by some member states for the creation of a new UN entity to support the collective efforts to govern this extraordinary technology, inspired by such models as the International Atomic Energy Agency, ICAO, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Secretary General also said that he's convening a multi-stakeholder high-level advisory board for artificial intelligence that will report back on options for global AI movements by the end of the year. Today, the Deputy Secretary General Mina Mohammed and the World Food Programme Executive Director Cindy McCain visited the Farchana refugee camp in eastern Chad, which has taken in people fleeing fighting in neighboring Sudan. The Deputy Secretary General said he was inspired by the courage of refugees she met at the Farchana camp, many of whom were women and children. Sudanese refugees have been warmly welcomed in Chad, she said. She said that she also heard stories of unimaginable suffering in Sudan and enormous needs in Chad. More international support is needed for refugees and their host communities, she said. Staying on Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the conflict there continues to displace civilians at an alarming rate. In just the last week, nearly 200,000 people were displaced by the fighting inside Sudan, according to new figures released by the IOM. Since the start of the conflict, the International Organization for Migration says that more than 2.6 million people in Sudan have been internally displaced. Meanwhile, more than 730,000 people have fled across Sudan's borders to neighboring countries since April 15th. That's according to UNHCR. The humanitarian community in Sudan continues to provide relief to those fleeing the fighting. In North Darfur, the UN Children's Agencies and its partners are supporting water trucking to gathering sites for internally displaced people, as well as healthcare facilities. They've also constructed more than 24 latrines. WHO, meanwhile, is working closely with Sudan's Ministry of Health and other partners in states sheltering internally displaced people to provide essential reproductive, sexual, and maternal and pediatric care. Yesterday, the UN Population Fund and its partners managed to deliver life-saving supplies, including 3,000 reproductive health kits to 6 hospitals in Khartoum State. UNFPA is committed to reaching all women and girls in need in Sudan with urgent health and protection services. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is once again sounding the alarm regarding the situation in the province of Ituri in the east, which has experienced a significant escalation of violence. In the past week, at least 40 civilians were killed in a span of 3 days in attacks by armed groups near the city of Bunia. In Ituri this year, more than 600 civilians have been killed, while 345,000 people have been displaced. We strongly condemn this violence and will call on all parties to adhere to international humanitarian law and human rights responsibilities. To respond to the urgent needs of people impacted by the violence, our humanitarian partners have scaled up their operations. We and our partners have supported 460,000 people in Ituri in the first quarter of this year. The current humanitarian response plan for the DRC is only 30% funded. We urge the international community to stand in solidarity with the people of the DRC and provide the support needed to address this spiraling humanitarian crisis. And our efforts to remove the oil from the FSO Safar vessel off the coast of Yemen are picking up steam, if you'll excuse the nautical expression. We can confirm that the Nautica, which is now known as the Yemen, which is a replacement vessel to which the million of oil barrels in the decaying tanker will be transferred, is only 3 kilometers from the Safar. The Nautica is making final preparations to moor next to the Safar, with ship-to-ship transfer of oil expected at the end of the week. Another vessel, the Endeavour, is already alongside to help with the transfer, and we hope to have Akim Steiner and David Gressley brief you soon on that. And turning to Ukraine, the humanitarian coordinator in that country, Denise Brown, today condemned an attack that damaged the Ukrainian port of Odessa overnight, just hours after the termination of the Black Sea Initiative. Ms. Brown said that civilian infrastructure, which is key for food security globally, appears to have been targeted, reminding that civilians and civilian infrastructure are protected under international humanitarian law. Our humanitarian colleagues note that, regrettably, attacks and hostilities continue to take a heavy toll on civilians in Ukraine. They're destroying lives and livelihoods and leaving nearly half of the people who remain in the country, some 18 million people, in need of humanitarian assistance. And our team in Trinidad and Tobago has welcomed the government's decision to include refugee and migrant children in the national school system at the primary school level in the new academic year. According to UNHCR, there are now more than 4,000 children between the ages of 5 and 17 among asylum seekers and refugees registered in the country. The UN team there is committed to working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago on the next phase of its approach to include refugees and migrants in the national school system to ensure that all children in the country receive a quality education. According to data published today by WHO and the UN Children's Fund, in 2022, 20.5 million children missed out on one or more vaccines delivered through routine immunization services. That's compared to 24.4 million in 2021. In spite of this improvement, the number remains higher than the 18.4 million children who missed out in 2019 before the pandemic-related disruptions in vaccine distribution. WHO and UNICEF noted that the early stages of recovery in global immunization have not occurred equally, with the improvement concentrated in a few countries. Progress in well-resourced countries with large infant populations, such as India and Indonesia, masks slow recovery or even continued declines in most low-income countries, especially for measles vaccination. And our colleagues from UN Women and UN Development Program today jointly launched a report which says that less than 1% of women and girls live in a country with high women's empowerment and gender parity. Based on an analysis in 114 countries, the report found that women's powers and freedoms make choices and seize opportunities remain largely restricted, and globally, women achieve only 60% of their full potential. This empowerment deficit and disparities are harmful not just to women's well-being and advancement, but also to human progress, according to the report. Tomorrow, my guests will be our Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Lee Junhua, who will be joined by Jutta Urpilainen, the European Union's Commissioner for International Partnerships, and Paolo Gentiloni, the European Union Commissioner for the Economy. They will be here to brief you on the ongoing high-level political forum. Finally, geography quiz for you today. The meaning of the Arabic word for this country means deep-rooted, well-watered, and fertile, but unfortunately the country is facing an extreme drought and water scarcity due to climate change. As a result, last year archaeologists had the unique chance to study the ancient city of Zachiku, which had been submerged in water but was recently exposed because of the drought. It's a Bronze Age city which dates back to the Mitanni Empire. It has since been covered by water again. Iraq. I think Jane Gaffney just won a prize because none of you answered. James.
So back to the grain deal. First, what's the Secretary General's reaction to the fact that Russians bombed the port facilities that were being used in Odessa for the grain deal?
Well, I think he echoes the sentiments expressed by Denise Brown. We have and will continue to condemn any and all attacks on civilian and civilian infrastructure.
Now, he had a meeting with Foreign Minister Kuleba yesterday, and I believe he then had a phone call with President Zelenskyy. They seem to suggest there might be a way of the UN and Turkey and Ukraine running some sort of grain operation, either using the existing routes or some other routes, without Russia being involved. And apparently, according to Minister Kuleba, the Secretary General said he'd look into all the feasibility of this. Does the Secretary General think this is a viable option?
Look, the Secretary General will continue to explore all possible avenues to ensure that Ukrainian grain, Russian grain, and Russian fertilizer are out into the global market. That is a determination of his. There are a number of ideas being floated. I think also questions need to be asked of ship operators and others. I mean, it's been very clear in the letter sent to us by the Russian Federation that they've removed the safety security guarantees for the Black Sea grain corridor. So those issues were brought up in the phone call and in the conversation.
Could you expand on the ideas that are being floated? You mentioned.
No, I think you should ask the Ukrainians to expand on them and the Turkish. Edith Lederer, there's a lot of AP here in the room today.
Thank you, Steph. As a follow-up to what James said, are there any new contacts between either the Secretary General or Rebecca Greenspan with Russian counterparts in
not in the last 24 hours. I mean, I spoke to Rebecca Greenspan earlier today. She is determined to continue her work on, as the Secretary General is, to see how we just can get these goods out to market, and that is for the public good, for the global good. We know the positive impact it has when Ukrainian grain and Russian fertilizer are out to market. So she is continuing her efforts, and the Secretary General will continue as well.
Can you also give us an update on any discussions going on about the Bab al-Hawa crossing?
On Bab al-Hawa, I note we're continuing discussions with all interested parties, and that includes the government of Syria. We can expect some movement, I think, later this week at the two other crossings until we resolve the issue of Bab al-Hawa.
And what would the United Nations like to see for its part in resolving the issue, going back to exactly the same situation that existed?
What we want to see is to have the ability to deliver humanitarian aid based on the humanitarian principles that we apply across the board. That's what matters for us, is our ability to reach those people in need, and the freedom that we have, as detailed, in I think the General Assembly resolution that created the emergency coordinator's role, which allows us and gives us the framework through which we operate our humanitarian work. Mr. Klein, and then Ms. Fasulo.
Yes, thank you. Actually, this is another follow-up to James' question, because the Hungarian foreign minister this morning at the General Assembly meeting on Ukraine made a very specific suggestion as an alternative to get the grain out to the wider global market, and that is to transit the grain through Central Europe, Hungary, presumably, and others who cooperate with Hungary, to ports that are safer, and then he did stipulate that if this were going to be undertaken, that the grain should be primarily going to countries in the Middle East and Africa. Is this one of the alternatives that the Secretary General may be considering, or has he had any discussions about this?
The Black Sea Initiative was the Secretary General helping, along with Turkey, create a framework through which commercial transactions could happen. We did not control the destination of the ships. These were commercial contracts. We've been extremely transparent as to where these ships and the grain and went to. The point for us, and this was the quickest way in a way to achieve the aim, is to get more volume out to market, which, according to basic, even my basic knowledge of macroeconomics, leads to a lowering of prices. There are other options that can be looked at, but there needs to be discussions with all interested parties to create safe and practical pathways. And the Secretary General is keen on doing whatever he can and being as useful as he can in these ways. I mean, and we know that grain also went out through the so-called solidarity lanes through Europe, and the European Union was involved in that. We were not. And
Is the Secretary General planning, or maybe he's already had, a bilateral meeting with Hungary's foreign minister to perhaps discuss this option?
I have to check if he's on the schedule, but I think the Secretary General is determined to continuing discussions to see how things can move forward. Ms. Fasulo and then Shin.
Thank you, Steph. Going back to AI and the Secretary General, you said that he said that he plans to convene an advisory board to come up with some options by the end of the year. Can you elaborate on that? Give us any details about it?
Well, I think this is a way of how do we as a global community deal with the threats and deal with the advantages that generative AI presents. And it needs to be done in a way that is, one of the words I hate the most in this organization, multi-stakeholder. But it is critical that it involve as many interested parties as possible, parties that have a control or authority over what is going on. Yeah.
Just to follow up, has he already reached out to people to take part in this advisory board?
Discussions are ongoing, and he has been briefed by some of the top engineers on AI. Toshi.
Thank you, Stefan. I have a question on the announcement of UN command in the Republic of Korea that said a U.S. citizen crossed into the DPRK over the military demarcation line. Do you have any detail on that matter?
No, because the UN command, despite its name, has no organic or operational link with the present-day Secretariat. It was something created during the Korean conflict with the Security Council the way it was at the time. So it does carry the name UN Command, but it is no way commanded by the Secretary General, nor do we have any involvement in it.
Understood.
And we're just seeing the media reports. We do hope that this issue gets resolved as quickly as possible in the most humane manner. Okay, Abdelhamid.
I have a few questions. Israel declared that it has recognized the sovereignty of Morocco over Western Sahara. Do you have any statement from the SG or from Mr. Dmytro on this development?
No, our position on the Western Sahara issue remains unchanged.
My second question is about a family who lives in Jerusalem, that family called Sab Laban. It has been evicted from their homes in Jerusalem last Tuesday. So it's a week past, and I didn't see any statement from the special peace coordinator or from the UN. Do you have any language on that?
I would encourage you to get in touch with the special coordinator's office. Obviously, we have spoken out against these types of evictions and expulsions. Ms. Nichols. Go ahead. Please go ahead, Abdelhamid.
The number of arrests of political activists in the West Bank by the Palestinian Authority had multiplied in the last few days since the Jenin encounter. Is the UN aware of these arrests?
We are aware, and we're, as always, concerned by arrests of people who are arrested for speaking out or just exercising their freedom of expression. Michelle.
Thanks, Steph. Just to follow up to your answer to James' question on grains, where you said a number of ideas are being floated. Is that, you sort of said that was in reference to getting Ukrainian and Russian grain to market, but then you said talk to the Ukrainians and the Turkish. So is the UN, is it specifically related to try to get
I think
grains to market?
let me try to say less, but perhaps be more precise. The Secretary General and his team are committed to continue to do whatever they can to resume the flow, to get Ukrainian grain, Ukrainian food products, Russian grain, Russian fertilizer out to market. We have seen the reports, and I think we've heard from a number of member states, as you have, about different ideas that are being talked about. What I was trying to say to James is that to get more details on those specific ideas, you should talk to those who are floating them.
Are you referring to ideas to get, like to resurrect the Black Sea grain deal in some form?
I'm referring to what I read on Reuters and other news organizations. Evelyn, and then we'll go back to the room. Okay, James, and then...
Okay, the statement you read out by OCHA on Sudan, 200,000 people displaced in a week. Just wanted to know, given the numbers already, how much of a difficulty is it for the UN trying to help these people, reach them? Are there aid and resources available for all of these people?
It's very difficult, and our colleagues who are on the ground, our local partners, are spending way too much time trying to negotiate their way through checkpoints, front lines, armed men, when we should be able to spend all of our time trying to get aid to those who need it as quickly as possible.
And then a follow-up, if I can, on AI. The Secretary General's speech in the Security Council, very interesting today, and talked about the speed and scope of AI and how it's going to affect us all. And it just seems there's a mismatch between the speed of AI and the speed of global governance. I mean, the Secretary General is talking about setting up a panel later this year. He's talking about a good place to discuss this will be the summit of the future in 14 months. We just have to look at climate negotiations. I mean, the international community can't get anything done fast at all. I mean...
One would be foolish to disagree with you, James. Science and technology move very quickly. The wheels and the cogs of diplomacy, of international governance, especially when you are talking about multi-stakeholders, which involves civil society, technology, and private sector, does not move as quickly as we would like it to be. The Secretary General is deliberate when trying to move things as quickly as possible. Deji.
Ukrainian President Zelenskyy said that he has sent official letters to the President of Turkey as well as Secretary General of the United Nations on that possible trilateral format of the Black Sea Initiative. Have you got any chance to see the letter? Would there be any differences from the current ones?
Yes, I've seen the letter. I would ask you to ask questions of those who've written the letter as opposed to whom the letter is addressed.
Because I just want to ensure this. Russia, Kremlin, they have been very clear. They said that if some agreements are to be formalized without Russia, then these risks should be taken into account.
The Black Sea is what it is, right? It has the countries that it has along its shores. I think everybody needs to be cognizant of that. There are ideas that have been floated. Again, I think I would encourage you to ask those who are floating the ideas.
Okay, so does the UN, yesterday we heard the SG about the disappointment and regret on the termination of this initiative, but does the UN share the thoughts with some of the member states that Russia has weaponized hunger?
I'm not going to go any further than I think the very direct words that my boss expressed to you yesterday. Mr. Bass.
Sorry, just to follow up, Deji was just talking about letters.
Yeah.
You were informed yesterday, and you said the only information you had on this was the JCC termination note that you got from Russia.
Yeah.
Did you then receive...
There were two
Secretary
notes that
General-
I've seen. One was a note from the Russian delegates to the IMO because it had to do with navigational safety, and one to the JCC. I will ask, and frankly, I forgot to check if there was another letter.
I just wondered if there was
I
any more
understand.
written explanation from Russia rather than a very terse note to the JCC.
Okay. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. The General Assembly today holds its annual debate on the temporarily occupied territories in Ukraine. President Chaba Kuroshi spoke at that debate this morning. He spoke about the wider situation, more broad situation in Ukraine. The war, as you know, has now been underway for 509 days, with tens of thousands dead, scores of thousands injured, almost 6 million refugees scattered across Europe, and an additional 6 million internally displaced. In his remarks, President Kuroshi said that unleashing wars cannot become the norm. Aggression against a neighboring country is illegal. Annexation is illegal. Attacking civilian targets is illegal, the president said. This was true in 1945. It was true in 2014. And it continues to be true today. The president said that the effects of this war extend beyond its borders, threatening the prospects of a sustainable future for people and the planet. Quote, simply put, this war is fundamentally unreconcilable with the achievement of our shared goals, the ones we hope to secure humanity's survival. We do not need nations fighting each other when we have a common enemy, the cascading crises all over the world. Excuse me. The president also spoke directly to Russia and its leaders, saying that he, as many others, have great respect for the Russian nation and culture. But, quote, you initiated this war, you have the power to end it, and as one of the most influential decision makers in the world, you can do it if you want to. The president reiterated his calls for all parties to come together in dialogue and diplomacy to restart negotiations on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And he also, once again, called for an end to the nuclear rhetoric. And you have the president's full remarks in your inboxes as well as online. And as for the debate, there's quite a long list of speakers still underway, and we expect the debate to go through the afternoon session. Today's Nelson Mandela International Day. The UN commemoration, as you know, will be this Thursday at 10 a.m. in Conference Room 1. President Kuroshi will deliver remarks. He will note that Madiba's life sculpted monumental change during the 20th century, and his legacy continues to shape the 21st. Among other speakers at Thursday's event will be Mrs. Naledi Pandor, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. Also joining will be New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Excuse me. As part of the annual UN commemoration, as you know, there's always a public service component. So the UN community is partnering this year with the City of New York to perform community service at the Nelson Mandela High School in Brooklyn. And this is in line with the theme for this year, which is climate, food, and solidarity. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the General Assembly will hold a debate in line with the so-called veto initiative. This debate follows the Security Council meeting on 11th of July, under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, specifically on Syria, when a permanent member cast a veto, and that debate will be in Conference Room 2, and President Kuroshi will deliver remarks. And before that, tomorrow morning, the president will pay his respects at the annual memorial service for UN personnel who lost their lives in the line of duty last year. And then in terms of his bilaterals today and yesterday, let me mention some of them. This morning, the president met with the foreign minister of Andorra, Mrs. Dmytro. This afternoon, he will be meeting with State Councillor Laszlo Berbeli to the Prime Minister's Office of Romania. He will also meet today with the parliamentary state secretaries of Germany. I'm going to skip through some of them and just call out the countries in case you're interested for your own uses. Also today, the president will be meeting with the Serbian Minister of Science, Technology, and Development. Yesterday, he met with the South African Minister of Water and Sanitation, as well as with Minister of Investment, Regional Development, and Information of the Slovak Republic. He also met with a senior official from Pakistan, as well as from the Austrian Federal Ministry, and from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And you'll have the full names and titles in the notes. That's everything I have for you today. James?
Given the Black Sea Grain Initiative affects all member states, are there any suggestions, any calls for a meeting of the General Assembly on the fact that Russia has terminated it?
I think today's meeting, it was already on the books prior to the announcement. But from what I can see, member states are certainly taking that into account in their statements.
You don't think there'll be a specific meeting on it?
There isn't one on the books right now. Okay, let me check in the chat. I don't see anything. Thanks very much.
Okay, so back to some of my other questions, and some of my other questions around this wrap around some of the responsibilities of NATO. Should NATO help Ukraine get those shipments safely out into the places that actually need the grains, the cereals, and these products that that Ukraine has sitting in their ports? Should NATO be helping also to get those things spread around the world, get the shipments delivered to where they need to go, either via escort or by shipping them themselves, producing the ships and helping them get there, or trains, however it actually takes alternative means? Or does NATO's responsibility simply stop at delivering arms and protection for the country because Ukraine is trying to become a member of NATO? It's a question of humanity in this particular case, because there's other areas of the world that really need this stuff, and NATO and NATO countries could actually hold the answers. So, a good question to be asked of NATO and NATO members: how can you actually help this effort out? It's good to help them protect their country. That is actually quite valiant. That NATO countries are willing to step in and help Ukraine protect their country, but for the people who really need to see a win happen with the products that they would deliver around the world, this could be another really strong way of helping protect Ukraine from the Russian Federation while they're under attack. So, thank you for listening today. You've been listening to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio. I've been your host, Michael Clogs. Please subscribe, and we will talk to you next time. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.